What's up, superhumans? Welcome to SuperFic, and today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Spider-Man Became X-Men Professor, Part 1. If you enjoyed this series, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
A week had gone by for Peter. Everything sent as smoothly as things always did. The three girls still seemed to have a crush on him, but he figured they liked the fantasy they had other than reality. It was nice of them when one day they actually gave him an apple. One each, that is. It was kind of nice if a little cliche, but he liked cliches. Some of this students showed real promise, like David Allen. The kid just seemed to really get into things. There was also Lori Collins, a shy girl that kind of reminded him of himself in high school. There were a few problems. He was still struggling with a certain class, but was getting a little headway. At least the pranks they liked to pull were toned down a little more. He tried to help Beak out. He was a good kid, just well. He didn't want to say bird brain, but it did fit. There was also Noriko Ashida. She was a Japanese girl who had to wear these huge metallic gauntlets all the time in order for her to control her powers. She was quite moody, and every time he tried to help her she seemed to pull away and retreat into her own personally place. Well, I guess it's time to head on home, he said to himself, backing up his things. He was wondering if MJ got that part for the photo shoot she had this morning. Xavier's office. Most of the senior staff were present. They had just finished discussing certain problems, like the return of a certain religious fanatics in the world. Also, they feared what would happen to all the mutants that had sworn themselves to Polaris. I guess we'll just have to wait and see, won't we? Xavier asked them. They all pretty much agreed they couldn't do anything at the moment until someone made a move. They moved the discussion to the school and students, which they finally got to Peter. So what does everyone think of Mr. Parker so far? Xavier asked them all. Well, he seems like a nice guy, Scott had to admit. At first he wasn't sure letting a human in was such a good choice, but he had to admit he was doing all right. Yeah, and I know the student like him, Kitty said. I overheard some of them actually say in my class they couldn't wait to get to his class. Beast chuckled. Yes, I know. I once looked in on him. He has a unique way of making it actually fun for the students to learn. Xavier looked interested in this. Oh, and how does he do that? Well, he has students volunteer for demonstrations and even use their powers if they're both careful, and not the deadly kind of power. He even goes into explaining the science behind some of their abilities. Hank told the professor, I must admit the students are learning not only about their science but also about themselves, which is quite a fascinating idea. Charles raised an eyebrow, intrigued about this. Well, how about the man himself? Logan, you seem to know more about him than the rest of us. Care to share anything? Logan did his best to hold back a smile. If you only knew Chuck, he thought inward, careful not to project it. I only know a bit about him. That he's married and what he did, that's about it. I didn't know he was married, Bobby said. You didn't notice the ring on his finger, Emma said to him. No, I guess I missed that, Bobby said. You know, I don't think we really know him at all, Danny said to them, thinking about all the time he had spent here. Logan nearly lost it at that point and nearly laughed, but thankfully no one could tell he was hiding it. The others agreed about all of this. Well, I don't think it will do to have a teacher here who we know nothing about, Xavier said. What do you have in mind, Charles? Emma asked him. Well, I think he should get to know Mr. Parker better. After all, he is teaching here, and we see him on a regular basis. So I think we should invite him and his wife over for dinner in order to get to know him better. Does anyone disagree? Charles asked them. Is this a fancy thing? Because I don't do that, Logan said, clearly making it his point that if it was, he was so out of there. No, Logan, we wouldn't do that to you, Charles said with a hint of a smile. I think it would be a good idea. We should get along with others more, especially human ones. Kurt spoke up. If we are to truly fight for a world where humans and mutants can live in harmony, I think if we can't sit down to dinner with them, how can we learn to live with them? Exactly my point, Kurt, Xavier said. Are there any objections to this? There didn't seem to be, so it was decided they would invite the Parkers over tonight if possible. Parker residence. Peter and MJ were sitting together on the sofa. MJ was glad she had got the photo shoot and Peter was happy for her. When the phone rang, he went to get it. MJ was listening in. Yes, how can I help you? Really? Well, I guess. Is it a formal thing or ... Oh, sure, I'll ask her ... Well, I'll see ... Okay, I'll call back. What was that all about, Peter? She asked him. Peter looked a little nervous. Well, that was Professor Xavier. He wanted to know if we would like to have dinner over at the mansion with the teaching staff. MJ looked surprised at this. You mean I can finally get to meet some of your friends? Well, to be fair, I did introduce you to Captain America, Peter said. MJ looked at him. Yeah, after a terrorist attack. Peter, I never get to meet the people in your life because you hide from everyone. Even those you fight alongside with. They don't even know you are Spider-Man and they're asking for you, Peter Parker. So this is the only chance I can get a glimpse into a part of your world I never see. Peter sighed. He knew it was useless to change her mind when it was made up. Well, better get out that green dress you like so much. I'll call them back to confirm it. Mary Jane smiled brightly at him. Thanks, she said, planting a kiss on him before leaving to get ready. Peter just shook his head. This was going to be a very interesting night. Bobby was trying to find the ideal residence. He was chosen to go and pick up the Parkers because they didn't have a car. He glanced at the address he had noted before turning to face the door. He stated aloud, "Looks like the place," when a stunning redhead who briefly made him think of Jean opened the door after he knocked. He instantly froze. "I'm looking for the Parkers. I'm very sorry." In fact, she smiled a little. She walked away from the door after saying, "You must be Bobby. Peter will be here in just a second. Why don't you come in?" Bobby, on the other hand, found it hard to imagine that a normal guy like Peter could have a wife like her. "Peter, you've just earned a lot more of my respect," Bobby mused. Peter gave MJ the lowdown throughout the car journey to the institute. MJ ran down the list of persons he informed her about. So Hank is the large blue cat-like guy. Kurt looks like a blue furry demon. Elf. Warren has wings. I have seen the images of these folks, so don't worry about it. Peter, I think I can take it. Peter and MJ exited the vehicle as Bobby parked it when they arrived. Peter escorted MJ to the mansion's entrance and entered the lobby. Peter noticed Logan seated against a wall and said, "So this is your wife, hubbub?" to Logan. When Peter's heart stopped pumping from the surprise, he exclaimed, "Geez, Logan, give a guy a heart attack, why don't ya?" Mary Jane gave Logan a quick glance. "So I presume you're the renowned Wolverine Peter has been relating to me for years," I said. Logan chuckled. MJ smiled, turning to Peter, "Believe every word of it, particularly the nasty ones." "Well, you are correct about him. He fits your description to the letter." Logan snorted and then started to walk away. "The others will be waiting for you in this fashion." They started out and soon arrived at a dining area. Before or after a meal was served, there was space to roam around and chat. It also had a long table. MJ speculated that it might have been a type of space that was once frequented by the upper class for festivities. MJ noticed numerous people when she turned to look. A few others looked at her in shock, like if they'd seen a ghost or something. When she entered, Scott, who was across the room, briefly believed it was Jean, but he soon understood that all she did was make him think of her. Jean walked differently, had different hair, and was taller. He surmised that the reason was that he was still in shock at her passing. Even on occasion in the city, he mistakenly believed she was nearby when a particular redhead passed by briefly. It ached so deeply that he missed her so much. MJ, on the other hand, was meeting the others. She met Emma, and after just one glance at what she was wearing, or not wearing, she decided she didn't want to work with a woman who dressed that way. She did have faith in Peter to keep his word and not engage in inappropriate behavior. But not in her. She was going down whether she had mutant powers or not if she even so much as glanced at Peter incorrectly. Juggernaut made her a little wary because she was reminded of Peter's post-fight condition. But Kurt and Hank caught everyone off guard, particularly after Kurt bamfed in next to her. As he did, she let out a little shriek of surprise. Kurt said, "Oh, Fraulein, I'm really sorry about that." MJ was slightly startled by his entry and then more so by his looks, but she responded, "Oh, it's no issue." MJ reasoned to herself, "If I could get used to that time when Peter had to bring Venom into our home, then I can manage him simply." In that little period, she had kept any dread of Venom a secret because, for the most part, she was only angry with him. She would never be able to forgive that monster for everything he did to her and to Peter. Kurt, though, made her realize he wasn't a monster or a nasty person since she could see the tenderness in his eyes and face. These folks were nothing like the monsters and evil she had personally witnessed. Around that time, Paige and Jubilee entered the room. Jubilee paused when she saw MJ and appeared to be a deer caught in the headlights. Paige questioned the girl, What is it?" But then Jubilee shrieked and went to MJ. Jubilee babbled out, "I can't believe it's actually you. I've longed to meet you. What are you doing here? Wait right there. I'll be right back, please," before hurriedly leaving the room. Danny turned to face Paige and asked, "What was it all about?" She only gave a shrug. I only know the girl, so don't stare at me. Jubilee quickly returned with something after leaving. It was the front of a magazine from a few years ago. She pleaded, I loved you on that soap opera you were on, and I loved that interview you gave. If you could please say this. MJ nodded as she blushed slightly at the looks she was receiving from some of the onlookers. Jubilee was thrilled that she knew her name and said, glad to meet a fan? Jubilee right. Yes, I am the one who said, I adored you on that show, and it hasn't been the same without you. MJ returned the magazine to her, this time with her signature and herself on the cover. Jubilee hurried back to put it in her room after squealing with joy. She commented to Peter, who was working hard not to chuckle at the girl's response, that she's a real bottle of energy, isn't she? Several of the females quizzed MJ about life on the soap opera, her co-workers, and modeling while everyone at the table was chatting about something or other over supper. She responded to all questions, and she was growing fond of these folks. Lockheed then made the decision to show up. Sadly, MJ didn't realize until he landed next to her and wanted to view the new individual. Kitty and Peter both made discreet attempts to shoo him away, but MJ turned before they could and found her face close to his. She screamed and almost slid back off her chair. Kitty cried at Lockheed. Lockheed, get over here. Now man. He flew alongside Kitty and gave her his doggy eyes performance. She scolded the little purple dragon, that won't work on me this time. Peter gave MJ a tense glance. MJ shot Peter a dirty look and said, sorry, I guess I forgot to tell Kitty has a small pet dragon, huh? You are definitely spending the night on the couch, mister. Peter and several of the guys winched out of pity. After eating, everyone split off into smaller groups and started conversing once more. Scott was outside admiring the night sky. He wasn't in the mood to speak at this time. Do you feel okay? He turned to see Mary Jane giving him a worried look. Scott sighed and resumed his search. I'm going through a hard period. It's nothing personal. He was approached by MJ, who put his hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry. I understand what it's like to lose someone, Peter said after telling him about his wife. Scott gave her an angry look. How are you able to know how it is? MJ didn't move an inch while glaring icily at him. She said, because I lost my child, and Scott was taken aback. He regretted saying such at this time greatly. Scott had no idea about all of this. I'm sorry, I didn't know about that. Although he couldn't blame Peter, he assumed that Peter didn't enjoy talking about it. She informed him that there had been issues during childbirth, but she was unable to explain that this was due to Norman Osborn exacting retribution on Peter for Harry's passing. They did nothing except observe. First to break it was Scott. Jean was the love of my life. She passed away in my arms and there was nothing I could do. I only wish ... that the last few months were better. I wish we hadn't been so separated. I wanted to tell her how much I regretted it and how much I still loved her. MJ was in tears. Scott glanced at her and said, if she loved you as much as you did, I suppose she already knew. Since I don't even know you, I'm not sure why I told you all of this. JR shrugged. Scott nodded in agreement. Sometimes you can only tell a stranger things you couldn't bear to tell your friends. In the cool night air, MJ shivered. Well, I'm going in. I know you're hurting right now and I get why you said that, and I hope you get well one day. She continued. Scott said, Mrs. Parker, thank you. MJ grinned a little. Scott bowed as she said, you're welcome. And please let me introduce myself as Mary Jane. After a while, all was said and done, and they decided to call it a night. They were taken home by Bobby. MJ thanked him for the trip when they arrived home. MJ turned to Peter in their apartment's living room. They certainly do. I mean, what Scott has to go through alone must be difficult. Peter approached his wife from behind and embraced her. I'm grateful I have you to keep me strong because I know some of us don't have it easy. MJ spun around in his arms before encircling him with her own arms. Why does the world seem to penalize those who are merely attempting to improve it? He answered softly, I wish I knew. Peter thought to himself, well, this is going fantastic. In the past, he had spent Sunday morning completing some schoolwork for Monday and the afternoon just hanging out in New York and doing whatever he pleased. He made the decision to attempt and persuade them to put it back after spotting a robbery in progress. Either way was okay, including thrashing the suspects until they were bloody blue for the police. He was also doing well. The majority of them were either unconscious or webbed up, so he had the situation under control. Until his spider sense went off. That is, he jumped up and over, assuming that one of the thugs was attempting a rear attack. That would have been preferable because the man not only grabbed his ankle but also threw him hard into a wall, leading him to believe this wasn't your typical robber. He noticed the ringmaster of this merry band while looking up. A tall, unevenly built, and noticeably pale-looking man in black said, Well, Spider, long time no see. Spider-Man stood up and remarked, Oh, wonderful tombstone. I thought you left town or something. Tombstone mocked him with a smirk. Just buying my time, Spider, until the underworld calmed down. With the Kingpin gone and all, there's a power vacuum. The Spider said. SpiderMan spoke to him, but it just appeared to enrage Tombstone. And let me guess, you're going to try and fill it. No offense. No, strike that. Offense intended, but you're not exactly Mr. Subtle like Fisk was. Although brief, the fight was fierce. By the time the police arrived, Tombstone and his thugs were all nicely restrained, and fortunately, Peter managed to capture a few good action shots. He made the decision to end the night because he was in excruciating pain in his ribs and had numerous bruises. He had to go far to get home. Now that it was night, he could enter the flat through the window without having to worry too much about being seen. He crossed the apartment to set the camera, together with his mask, gloves, and web shooters, on a table. Additionally, he needed to construct and prepare the movie for JJ. For the following day, it's great that I have to get early, droop them off, be yelled about, receive inadequate pay, and then hastily travel across town to the Xavier Institute for classes. I was going to be one of those days, so Peter raised the only arm he had that didn't hurt when he raised it to pinch the bridge of his nose for the headache that would do. In fact, even though the sun wasn't up yet, it was already one of those days because it was after midnight. He reflected to himself, some days were better if I just didn't get out of bed. The extra first aid kit was in the kitchen, so he headed there. Years of doing this taught him the hard way that it is always best to keep two and to keep both in ample supply. He took the top of his outfit off while gritting his teeth. Through his torso, he felt the stabby ache of rib bruises. When the door to the bedroom opened, he was just about to tape them up. MJ remained there and observed him. She approached him and rendered assistance. They both remained silent. They didn't need to communicate because they had experienced this so frequently. Although she had seen him in much worse circumstances, seeing Peter in this state still hurt. She despised that he was harmed while carrying out this task. But she also understood that there was a need for him there, and that he couldn't stop it. She was aware of how crucial what he did was. She sat down next to him on the couch after bandaging him completely, and sterilizing and covering all of his incisions. He leaned his head on her shoulder while she did the same. At moments like this, when he was worn out and needed her the most, he needed her. He then ascended. Peter should be sleeping, so what are you doing? Peter sighed in exhaustion. JJ would probably be upset that I didn't give him the images this evening, knowing how he is, so I should finish them up for him in the morning. MJ checked the time, which was 2:34 a.m. Peter, I doubt he would ... wait. I think he would, I said. For the first time in hours, Peter grinned. MJ glanced worried at him and said, why don't you go to bed while I finish up? I don't want to keep you up. Peter, you won't be in any form for class tomorrow. Maybe you should call in sick. Peter gave a head shake. I won't spoil this like last time, so I can't do that. MJ observed him leave to get his camera. She attempted to fall asleep after getting into bed but failed. After waiting more than an hour to get into bed, Peter was still wearing his uniform since he was too exhausted to take the rest of it off. When MJ awoke in the morning, Peter was still asleep. At 7:38 in the morning, she turned to face Peter. He still appeared exhausted, and his eyes had bags under them. She made the choice to let him rest. She entered the living room stealthily before making a phone call. She made a phone call to the institute. The voice of Logan, who was recognizable, said, Xavier Institute. A sigh of relief escaped her lips. She was aware that he was aware of Peter's past. I need Logan to let them know that Peter won't be there today. On the other line, there was stillness. He asked evenly, leaving MJ unsure of whether he was worried or perhaps curious about how long he would be away. He requested me to wake him, but he needs his rest, so I'm letting him sleep in. So could you tell the others he's sick or something? He ran into someone last night and it got a little rough. He didn't get to bed until around 3 in the morning. And he's dead weary. A brief pause followed the words, sure, no problem. Logan told her, you're a nice wife to that guy. She gave the caller on the other line a smile. She said, I know, and thanks, hung up the phone, and went to see how Peter was doing. She gathered some clothing while he was fast sleeping, then slipped back outside. She got ready and discovered the photographs he had taken the previous evening. She intended to personally deliver them to Jameson so he wouldn't have to stand up. Aunt May was requested to watch for Peter while she was away. May responded that she had covered all the essentials and that she would be right over to take care of him, in order to let Peter know what had transpired if he woke up. MJ quietly placed a letter next to him while thanking her. She silently left their apartment before locking the door behind her. Logan hung up the phone after Parker's wife called. She might not be able to stop him from getting harmed in a fight, but she could watch out for him until it was over. He anticipated that something similar would occur sooner or later. He was aware that Peter possessed a variety of abilities, but unlike Logan, he lacked the ability to heal. Thus the bumps and bruises would vanish the following morning. He made his way to Xavier's office via the corridors. He knocked first but, as is customary, didn't see the replay before entering. Chuck asked, "Hey, do you have a moment?" as Xavier rose from his desk. "Yes, Logan, I do." Parker's wife called, saying that he's not feeling well and has called in sick. "Do you have somebody who could take over for the day?" Charles contemplated it. "I think Hank or Kitty could fill in." I saw Logan nod. He turned to walk away and said, "That's fine." Then he paused and looked back at him. "Oh, and Professor, I have to go because I have stuff to look into." Charles's face contained a faint smile. "Logan, of course you do." Apartment Parker. May Parker had only just entered. After closing it, she stepped inside to check on Peter. He was still wearing a costume on the bottom half when she saw him there, and his uncovered upper body had several bruises and bandages. Over the covers, he was spread out on the bed. May moaned in sorrow as she saw him. She was still getting used to the idea that Peter had been engaging in this activity since he was a young adult. He was left to sleep as she discreetly closed the bedroom door. Since she had forgotten to prepare coffee this morning, she walked over to the kitchen. She had left the house without anything to help wake her up this morning because she was in such a rush to get here. She sat on a chair in the little apartment's kitchen, dining area, and carefully awaited its conclusion. After a short while, she prepared a cup for herself and put the pot back on the heater to keep it warm in case Peter got up and wanted some. A tap on the door was heard after she had only drank a few sips. Who would be here at 8 in the morning? She reasoned. So why would MJ be back, and maybe she forgotten her keys or something? She was shocked to see a man wearing a biker jacket, trousers, and a really distinctive hairstyle when he opened the door. On the sides of his head, it seemed to rise in 2 places. He also didn't have a clean shave. She demanded the man's identity while he merely appeared to smile. "I'm Logan from the Institute." His wife called and mentioned that he had some problems the night before. "I just wanted to make sure he was okay." May gave him a dubious look. Logan moaned and drew nearer. "You don't need to worry about it because I am aware of his other job, which involves swinging about the city." May was stunned by the revelation and took a step back. She told him, "Oh ... so you know about ... well, then I guess you could come in." She pointed at him and added, "But you best not wake him up or you are out of here. You got that, gentleman?" At the elderly woman, Logan couldn't help but grin. He reflected, "She's got spunk, I'll grant her that." He entered the apartment and had a look around. It was somewhat compact. There was a tiny but inviting living room area with a green couch, a chair, a table in front of them all, and a TV on the opposite wall. The kitchen and dining room were essentially in the same space. He turned to look for a doorway and walked toward it. Logan put up his hand to hush May as she attempted to disagree, and carried on. He discovered him there after slightly opening the door. Although not much, he could also smell some dried blood. He then shut the door, went to the dining room, kitchen table, and sat down in one of the chairs. He considered how he appeared to him. He would appear considerably worse at the estate, but Hank was usually present there. He had never considered the struggles that these lone heroes faced in situations like this. Logan questioned May, "How many times does this happen?" She took a seat next to him. Although he was doing a good job of concealing it, she could hear a trace of worry in his voice. She groaned, "I recently learned about this, so I can't really say. But looking back, I believe it resurfaces occasionally. It wasn't exactly the best way to learn your nephew is a superhero to stumble across him sleeping and uncover the shredded remains of one of his costumes." Logan gave a head shake. After knowing this man for years, he suddenly realized there wasn't much else he knew about him outside the fact that Peter was Spider-Man. "Why does he do this?" he questioned her. "I understand why the others, and I argue because someone needs to defend mutants. But I have no understanding why he does it." May spoke bluntly, but with a sense of regret. With great power comes enormous responsibility. Logan turned to face the female. "What does he mean?" "I've heard him say it before." May groaned. May told Logan all about Peter's Uncle Ben and what happened to him, saying, "I'd rather he tell you, but since it took years for him to tell me, I guess I'll give you the basic version." She expressed to him how accountable he felt for his demise. Logan gave a head shake. He reasoned, "So that's why he does this with such a passion." Logan turned to face May, who was seated next to her. He just said, "Not being a guy of many words, thank you." May gave him a warm grin. The door then abruptly opened and shut. Since there was nothing between them and the front door, they were both able to turn and observe Mary Jane barge in through it. She screamed angrily, "That man is impossible. How does Peter endure it? Then saw that they had company. What are you doing here, Logan? Logan got out of his chair and walked over to the entrance. He turned to face May and said, just checking in to see if the webhead was going to be out longer than a day or something. Nice to meet you, he said as he opened the door and walked out. Mary Jane continued to seem astonished as she turned to face May. May only gave a shrug. So what did that Jameson person do this time? I guess he was just worried, the speaker said. MJ launched into a tirade about how completely impractical that man, as she kept calling him, was. He tried to lower the price after learning that MJ had submitted the photos herself and that Peter was ill, assuming that she was unaware of how much money Peter had received from those images. He continued by saying that if he could crawl to work on a broken leg, Peter could do the same. When he referred to Peter as a lousy, lazy camera jockey, MJ had to restrain her temper. Before she decked him, she swiftly left after receiving payment for the photos. May shook her head as she stared at her, dismayed. May replied, I swear that man grows worse and angrier every year. How Peter puts up with that hot air-filled, Hitler mustache-wearing man is beyond me, exclaimed MJ. Tell me about it. She removed a hair off her face by brushing it. How is Peter doing? Is he still asleep? April nodded. MJ told her, good, we should allow him. He's been busy recently and truly needs it. It had been a few days since he had reported himself as ill. Even though he knew she was merely looking out for him, he still didn't enjoy the idea that MJ had treated him that way. He was unaware of Logan since they chose not to inform him because doing so may make him more challenging to manage. Logan was giving Peter weird looks occasionally, and Peter had no idea why. Peter muses, probably simply checking to see if I exhibit any indications of the fight I was in. He goes to his class for the second period. Every day, it seems as though more and more students are enrolling at Xavier's. Additionally, there were sounds of additional building being done to expand the school. On his updated attendance list, he noted a few new names, aside from Paige and Jubilee, who were away on a mission. Every seat in the classroom was occupied, but he was relieved to see that it wasn't overcrowded when he looked up. Peter told them, so class, here is what's on for today. Outside, numerous men dressed in white robes are there in two unmarked black trucks. They belong to the Extreme Church of Humanity, a group that rejects God and believes that mutants. They are arming themselves with explosives and armor. Some people dress themselves in crosses, while others pray perversely with their guns pressed up against their bent heads. At the front of the car, a man dressed in robes stands up. Everyone looks at him as if he were a holy figure, despite the fact that he lacks anything remotely holy. His pale face is covered by a black beard, and his chilly, dark eyes scan the gathering right now. His voice is filled with religious reverence while expressing hate and venom. We have learnt that most of the parents in this school are away, so we will take this moment to cleanse this filthy evil from our lives and send these abominations back to hell. The others only chose to listen to the reverence while supporting him. They all complete their pre-production. This group's leader moves to the front. He speaks quietly to the driver. Let us begin. When the driver of one vehicle starts driving, the other van follows suit. Up until they can see the school's gates, they continue to drive normally. When they accelerate further, the lead vehicle bursts through the gates to launch the assault. Statistics classroom. When the alarm goes off, Peter is still in class. He initially mistook it for a bell before his spider sense kicked in. Then the PAW system starts. They hear Scott call over the system. Attention all pupils. We need all students to go to the lower levels. Instantly go there right now. Everyone can hear how urgent he is speaking. Peter responds without further ado. Okay, you heard the man. He indicates the door. The lower levels are for everyone. As the class moves out the door, a lone student approaches and inquires, what's going on? Peter says, I don't know, but I want to find out. When the lecture is over, he grabs his suitcase and storms into the hallway, where he encounters Kitty Pryde. He inquired urgently, what's happening? Kitty declared, her voice filled with panic, the school is under attack. He is led into the teacher's lounge by her as she clutches his arm. She said firmly, I want you to stay here, no matter what. Okay. Kitty enters the group through the wall as Peter nods his head. Peter scans the area. There are no windows in the room, but he notices a ventilation duct that is big enough for a person to fit through. Peter grins silently. Perfect. He sets the case on the neighboring table and then, just to be safe, locks the door from the inside. He returns to the case and opens it up so that his outfit and web shooters are visible. Outside, the Church of Humanity is attacking head-on. Unfortunately, some of the kids who were outside during the incident were in between classes or during a free period. They shoot anything that moves. A number of kids were found on the ground with clear injuries, while others are being defended by those employing authority. At this time, Wolverine, Shadowcat, Danny Moonstar, Karma, Ron, and Kurt were the only X-Men present at the Institute. To try to save the students, they were giving it their all. Kurt was sending little groups down to the hospital's emergency room, where Annie was ready to help. By phasing the students, Kitty was also assisting the ones that were unharmed in escaping. Logan was launching a vengeful assault against the COH, while Danny and Ron tried their best to disarm as many of them as they could. Karma was in charge of some of them and ordered them to lay down their weapons. Up until the arrival of 2 more vans, they were also winning. Bobby, who is currently in his ice form, stated from one of his ice slides, "Great, seems like they came back up too." He walked toward the vans but was blindsided when one of the assailants threw a grenade at his slide. In addition to shattering his slide, the explosion also launches Bobby into the air, where he crashes forcefully and becomes dazed. While Sophia Mantega, a friend of Noriko Ashida's, uses her abilities to generate enormous wind gusts to push a few of the attackers back a few feet. The Japanese girl Noriko Ashida, who is equipped with special gauntlets, shoots electrical attacks. Additionally, the Stepford Cuckoos are there using their collective intelligence to put some of the new arrivals to sleep. Up until a grenade burst goes off too close to them, they are doing fine. They aren't seriously harmed, but they can't concentrate since their heads are ringing. The attackers then approach them with rifles raised by 2 of them. They believe that this is it. They will join their other 2 sisters who passed away on this day. According to them, they all take each other's hands as they get ready for the conclusion. The men look up as 2 webbing shots attached to their rifles and are pulled away. Not so fast there, pal. The moment the 3 sisters look up, Spider-Man leaps from the mansion's wall. He touched down in front of the 3 females and immediately leapt back up to fly over the heads of the suddenly helpless guys in robes. He seized their heads and slammed them together while he was over their heads, knocking them out. The 2 tumbled to the ground, and he landed. The dismount is flawless, too, Spider-Man added. Danny gave a man a close-up view of his worst fear and whispered over her shoulder, "Hey Spider-Man, what are you doing here?" He responded to her, dodging bullets, "Well, I heard there was a party going on, and I decided to come since I was in the neighborhood and everything. I bet these men are the party crashers, you say," Ron said in her werewolf form. "You can say that," and then pounced on one of the robed individuals. Soon after that, it was finished. While the others disarmed and restrained the attackers, Kurt was transporting the injured to the hospital ward. Naturally, Spider-Man made things simpler by webbing them up. He had just finished with the group's leader. He started to scream, "You and the other freaks shall suffer the wrath of God. You hellspawn's demons. We will hump." But Spider-Man webbed his mouth and stopped him. He responded to him, "You know, I've heard a lot over the years. Everything from lunatics and their justifications for assuming control of the world to pompous megalomaniacs and their flowery speeches to guys and their justifications for retaliation. On the other side, you disgust me." In the distance, siren sounds could be heard. Spider-Man informed the X-Men that it appeared that the neighbors had complained about the noise. "The police and I don't really get along, so I guess that's my cue to go. See you all later, and if you don't mind, I think I'll take the back entrance." With that, he sang up to the mansion's upper level and shot a web line there. He leaped onto the roof, crossed it, and then vanished behind it. A few of the pupils raised their heads in wonder at his sudden disappearance. One of the smaller kids who was still outdoors exclaimed, "That was really cool." Kitty shook her head and headed back inside right away. She wanted to see if Peter was still in the room because she had forgotten about him. Because it was quicker than taking the long way, she began to phase through the rooms. She eventually arrived in the space. She then exhaled and said, "Hey Peter, just letting you know that Peter was there, standing." He was removing a top that was the same as Spider while Man still wearing his slacks and shoes. She put her hand to her mouth and continued to stare at Peter before catching sight of his bag and the false back on which were lying his regular shirt and tie as well as the Spider-Man mask, gloves, and web shooters. They simply exchanged intense looks. Peter looked like a deer in headlights, and Kitty was in amazement. Peter and Kitty exchanged blank looks as they waited for the other to talk, act, or do anything. Kitty muttered under her breath, "Oh my God." This was so unbelievable to her. The identity of Spider-Man was one of the best kept secrets. She just walked in on the one person she wouldn't even think to be Spider-Man because no one knew who he was. Peter answered cautiously, I can explain." Kitty gave him a glance. She nevertheless expressed some disbelief about this, saying, "This should be nice. Okay, would you think that underneath my clothes, I'm the biggest Spider-Man fan in the world?" Kitty responded to him, no. What is better than that, you ask? Peter sighed, no, not really. What happens next? For a brief period, Kitty was silent. You're Spider-Man, right? She eventually let out a scream. Peter hurriedly approached her and covered her mouth before he winced. SHHH. I go under a different name. Therefore, nobody can know. I don't want this to be known throughout the neighborhood and the entire of New York State. Now that I'm removing my hand, would you kindly refrain from yelling anything similar in the future? Kitty bowed her head as Peter implored, and he gently withdrew his hand. Kitty stared across at him as he quickly shifted, 1,000 questions racing through her mind. I think I need to sit down, she remarked drowsily and sat down on a free seat. Is this something that only I know about? Peter, who had just finished putting on his shirt, paused before turning to look at her. Well, not quite. Logan is aware, but that is all. Logan, how long? She yelled. She pushed back. Several years, in truth. He recognized me when I wasn't in costume thanks to that damn nose of his when we first met in Canada on this thing we had with a Wendigo. Logan knew for years and didn't tell anyone. Kitty wondered aloud as her mouth fell open. Him and me are going to have a long discussion, Kitty stated in a mildly irritated tone. Peter joked, yeah well, the guy can keep a secret, before taking a serious tone and sitting next to her, saying, Kitty, I need you to keep this to yourself. Kitty fixed her gaze on him and could sense his worry and the gravity of the situation. Okay, but I have to ask you a question at this time. Why have you never given your identity to anyone? We don't precisely reveal any of our secrets either, I suppose. Peter sighs and turns his head away. I put at risk everyone who knows that I'm Spider-Man. Everyone who is close to me eventually suffers harm or worse. Come on, Kitty said, it can't be that horrible. Although Peter remained still, his voice was steady and dispassionate. The Green Goblin was responsible for the deaths of my child with MJ, Gwen Stacy, her father, and others who learned of me or were connected to me and became targets for others to exploit. The Green Goblin also was responsible for the loss of my child with MJ, said Stacy. Kitty was speechless. She was speechless and felt her eyes start to tear up as she heard the sadness in his words. She muttered, I'm sorry. I'm hesitant to say anything. Peter turned to face her, his eyes drained. He stood up and retrieved his case after saying thanks. Kitty nodded, and they walked out of the room to check how the others were doing. To get to the hospital ward, Peter and she descended to a lower level. They took a silent route there. When they arrived, Annie was helping many pupils who were suffering the most. Kitty approached her and asked, Annie, do you need any help? When Annie looked up, her hair was a complete mess, and her gloves and suit were covered in blood. She looked at her and said, anything you can do to stabilize will do for now. You should go unless you have any experience with injuries. Peter said, I have experience, which genuinely startled Annie. Kitty figured she could be familiar with his background. Peter pulled out his go-to-cover tale as soon as he noticed the expression she gave him. I participated in the Carnage riots, assisted out, and also suffered injuries, so I had first-hand knowledge of all sides of the situation. Annie nodded before pointing to the pupils by the wall who required assistance, but weren't in immediate danger. Kitty instantly followed Peter as he headed to the. Peter started tending to the hurt students. Years of self-practice paid off on this day. He also observed Josh Foley, a mutant student with golden skin, utilize his healing abilities to assist. After I took a few hours, everyone was exhausted. Fortunately, the robed assailants had poor aim and missed the majority of essential organs. In fact, Annie had utilized a small amount of the healing angel's blood she had on hand to aid the most seriously injured. However, a large number of the pupils were remained in the medical ward and would need to remain there for at least a few days for supervision. Kitty and Peter had taken a seat next to a wall. Kitty was dozing off with her head on Peter's shoulder. You know I have a lot of questions, right? Kitty whispered to him. Peter nodded while he moaned. Peter was relieved when she said, but I think they can wait until another time. He truly didn't feel up to it in light of everything they had just been through. Scott entered the scene and observed everything. He approached Peter after spotting him. Scott responded to him. I heard you helped out down here. Thanks. Although it wasn't exactly cordial, it wasn't hostile either. Peter was astonished that he wasn't incensed with humanity after what they had just done above. Don't worry about any of the other classes. I've cancelled the lessons for the rest of the day, he told him. Peter managed a groggy smile. Thank you. I'm going to surprise my wife at home. Scott did manage to give him a little smile. The bus could take a while. You want a ride? Kitty's response interrupted Peter as he was considering it. She remarked, surveying her surroundings. I will. I need to get out of here for a while after this anyhow. Scott nodded his head in agreement before heading out to see how the kids were doing. turning to Kitty. Peter, you know you didn't have to do that. The cat shrugged. I understand. But you earned it for aiding us. And moreover, we could converse briefly en route. Peter exclaimed, banging his head on the wall. Oi. He felt Kitty poke him in the ribs. Besides, I'll try to keep the questions light. Come on, it won't be that horrible. They struggled to stand, but eventually they did, and they walked over to the garage.
This was it for today. I will continue this story in next part. Till then, goodbye.